Here is Elisabetta Biasin. You should be able now to visualize my presentation, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. I'm a researcher at the Leuven Center for IT and IP Law, and I'm working in the e-health department. So in today's workshop, I will bring a healthcare use case, and I will speak about medical device manufacturing through healthcare collaborative platforms. And I will propose a focus on cybersecurity requirements. So the objective is to provide perhaps a more unusual and unexpected perspective on collaborative manufacturing. And I believe it deserves attention a bit because it brings some values and propose certain kinds of innovative solutions that stem from an architecture that is decentralized. So this presentation we propose a brief overview of healthcare collaborative platforms, and we propose 4 key issues, and also we conclude with a primer on future and possible regulatory developments in healthcare cybersecurity and collaborative manufacturers. So in the last year, there has been a significant growth of healthcare's focused collaborative manufacturers, collaborative platforms. And I will bring some examples, for example, careadvocates.org or passion innovation of makers making change. So especially this, I've been researching this, of course, because I've been involved in an Horizon 2020 project, which was made for you, which had the objective to set up a collaborative platform, healthcare collaborative platform, to put in contact several makers to co-design and co-create healthcare solutions, including also medical devices. So, for example, this careables.org, you can see it in visualized here, was launched in 2018, and its aim was fostering exactly the design of healthcare solution through co-creation and proposed open, inclusive approach to healthcare, and was based on digital fabrication and distributed manufacturing and collaborative making. And in this platform, users can upload their documentation for healthcare projects, and for example, you may see here visualize the COVID-19 collection, which was very active, especially last years, with all solutions that might help in tackling everyday challenges for healthcare that derive for the pandemic. And of course, the platform includes other projects for mobility to self-care and indoor or outdoor installations, for example. And then another example is for makers making change that you can see visualized in this slide. It's a Canadian nonprofit organization, and the platform objective is to connect makers at local level to people having some kinds of disabilities in need of assistive technologies. And the aim, for example, of this platform is to enable everyone to publish and share open source assistive technology designs. And this platform, for example, has a library and contains an open source collections of assistive technology solutions. And it provides also the possibility, for example, to having to ask a solution to be built by a network of volunteer makers. And also there is another example that is patient innovation, and it's a kind of same concept of platform and social network, allowing patients to connect with makers, caregivers to find a healthcare solution, because sometimes some kind of healthcare solutions are not the need that people have for this kind of healthcare solution are not in the market because, for example, these are not responding to a specific, these perhaps are too rare or the need is too specific. So major manufacturers do not have the economic interest to fabricate these kind of solutions. So this kind of collaborative manufacturing in healthcare from the bottom is a kind of responding on these needs based on the current needs of patients. So the common denominator of these platforms is that the designers, makers, healthcare professionals come over together and share the knowledge, and they create healthcare projects for individuals which have some kinds of healthcare needs. And these are users, communities that collaborate online in these platforms and use the advantage of these digital technologies, and they share their knowledge with their designs. So the key stakeholders that we have identified, of course, are, for example, individuals and patients that are in need of a particular healthcare solution, or healthcare professionals that support individuals and patients in finding the most suitable healthcare solution for their needs, designers, engineers, developers that want to share their projects and populate the platform with their designs. And also at a local level, there are these makers that are in charge of locally replicating from a specific design that has been uploaded on the platform. They replicate locally this open source hardware healthcare solution. So this is more or less a swift introduction to this kind of collaborative manufacturing in healthcare, this specific use case of these collaborative platforms. So what are the challenges or the issues that we can identify so far? So the first one is, of course, the identification of medical device law and its applicability. So it's a question that is important that people, when they manufacture some specific healthcare solution, they have to make. So the question is, does medical device law apply to this open source hardware solution? So let's make an example. What can constitute open source hardware solution that perhaps is a medical device? And we have some examples, such as prosthetic hands, that they might be manufactured locally and might help people with certain needs to have it. Or also, we can also bring the example of a software. So there are some associations, especially in the US, that have manufactured some systems called artificial pancreas systems to monitor, for example, glucose, or for some specific disease. So to monitor some kind of health parameters. So these may be examples of both hardware or software as medical devices. So the issues that we have identified here, of course, is you are working on a healthcare collaborative platforms, which is also has a global reach. So it's really important to also consider that this platform and the applicability of law depends also on, for example, international private law, but also depending on the specific issues at stake, you need to take into account where you, for example, you replicate or manufacture when you design a solution. So this is another layer of complexity that is being added. And briefly to identify whether an item is a medical device, you need to take into account, for example, the personal scope. So if you are a maker, if you are an individual and you are replicating locally a specific healthcare solution, you need to understand whether you are a manufacturer of medical devices. In the meaning of, we took in our study the case of EU law to add more concreteness, but of course, that may apply also analogously in other legislations. And it was very interesting to note that to qualify as a manufacturer, it's important to understand in which business you are operating. And this is also important as regards to liability aspects. Also, it's important to evaluate the material scope if the product, of course, falls in the definition of a medical device. And thirdly, but not less importantly, the purpose of the medical device, because the makers needs to evaluate very well what is the purpose and if it will be intended to be used as specifically established before they're making into circulation. And an example of medical purpose could be to compensate a disability or an injury, or replacing or modified a part of human anatomy. And here we are right in another crucial issue. So once we establish where an healthcare solution is not a medical device, we need also to take into account that if the medical device entails the processing of personal data, or, for example, it is connected to healthcare networks, it is worth to consider also cybersecurity requirements. Medical device law already contains cybersecurity requirements, although it doesn't mention cybersecurity as such in the whole text. In 2020, the EU-level body, Medical Device Coordination Group, issued its guidance on medical device cybersecurity, and in order to orientate stakeholders manufacturing medical devices with respect to cybersecurity. And there are core requirements to keep into consideration. For example, as general requirements, of course, medical device has to achieve the performance intended by the manufacturer and shall be designed in a way that is suitable for the intended use that we have described before. They have to be safe and effective, and the associated risks shall be acceptable and weighted against the benefits of the patient and a level of protection of health and safety, take into account the state of the art. And of course, manufacturers have to implement a risk management system. And the most important cybersecurity requirements in MDR, which is Medical Device Regulation, are foreseen in its Annex 1, and they include, for example, its design and manufacturing in a way to remove risks that are associated with possible negative interaction between software and IT environment. So this is let's say an environment requirements, but also medical devices shall be designed to ensure repeatability, reliability, and performance that are according to the intended use. And of course, you need to adopt any means, appropriate means, not any means, sorry, to reduce risk of impairments on performance. And also manufacturers are required to set some minimum requirements concerning hardware, IT networks, characteristics, and IT security measures. And it's interesting to note that the Medical Device Cooperation Group provided some exemplifications, such as audit controls, configuration of security features, personal data, the identification, emergency access, malware detection or protection, physical logs. So there is a list of those security measures, an exemplificatory list, of course, because it's in the responsibility of manufacturers to implement according to also the state of the art and in the risk management. There is a list of specific and examples of security measures, and it's really interesting to see it. And also there are also some cybersecurity requirements concerning information and labeling for medical devices, that these have to be supplied with the device, and manufacturers have to inform end users about residual risks. They should provide warnings that might require immediate attention on the label. And they have also to provide minimum information for specific software entailing medical device software. And also, what is most importantly, medical device software, they have to be a medical device, so all medical devices have to be secure by design. So it means that all the different stages of medical device manufacturing needs to encompass cybersecurity requirements, security requirements, and this includes the risk management plan for manufacturing a medical device, its risk assessment, its risk control, and also post-market surveillance. And I think these are more or less the most important parts and aspects of medical devices cybersecurity, and also provided in a medical device coordination group guidelines. Then I also wanted to bring some attention to issues concerning liability. So the previous panel already provided an amazing and enriching overview, in my opinion, of many issues concerning liability. In the case of makers in healthcare collaborative manufacturing platforms, I think it's also there is another perspective that is worth to bring, because while I was involved in this research project, I've noticed that many makers were asking to me, okay, but what are the risks for me as a designer, as a healthcare professional? If something gone wrong, what are my liabilities? And for us, I mean, for the team involved in the research, it was at first glance a bit complicated, because the role of makers of medical devices, makers of healthcare solutions, are not so clear in EU legislation. So it's a kind of the liability rules are challenging a little bit, in our view, by the novel role of makers and design, because they do not entirely fit in the traditional scenarios. And in fact, so depending on the fact if you are manufacturing a medical device or a healthcare solution, it brings a lot of difference. And in this difference, there is a whole gray area. And in fact, as widely known, an individual or a legal entity may be held liable under a product liability law when a product is defective and causes personal injury to an individual. And if the product is defective, the manufacturer might be held liable, even he or she has not been negligent in manufacturing it. So it's applied the strict liability doctrine. However, the interpretation of product liability law may become fuzzy when makers and designers are involved, because strictly liability applies to products that have been industrially produced, when products were manufactured for sale or economic purposes, or in the course of producer's business. Here, with makers, it's not always clear where these kinds of do-it-yourself environments, these are not necessarily regular sellers, and sometimes they're hobbies. So it's really important to understand this, and to see, in our opinion, to go on a case-by-case approach. But of course, this means there is a kind of certainties for these players. And of course, there are no clear rules for makers and designers. And in our findings, there are no also significant EU case law in this regards. But of course, as a general rule, there are also case-by-case basis should be applied as a general rule for strict liability. And of course, there is also not only strict liability, but also due diligence standards that should be taken into account. So another kind of liability. And by reconnecting also with some discussions in the previous panels, it would be also interesting to ascertain more about liability when a cybersecurity incident occurs. I think it's really interesting in a field of medical devices, cybersecurity as well. For example, the Medical Device Cooperation Group guidance mentions that cybersecurity is a joint responsibility amongst all stakeholders that are involved, and the guidance mentions a lot of stakeholders involved, including the end users and also the individuals that might be involved. So this is something that might be also relevant to the previous discussions. And I wanted to provide also some final thoughts on data sharings, because the same problems in identifying manufacturer and professionality of manufacturers may also be relevant for data protection law. And this is a big thought-provocative consideration if these individuals are not are not considered as manufacturer, are not considered as in a business context, that should also household exception apply to not medical devices, but healthcare solutions that are being developed in those circumstances. And finally, I wanted to bring some final remarks on AI and medical devices and some EU law making perspectives. The first one, I think it's worth to monitor a little bit and to report in this workshop, because it's worth to know what could be the next impacts on medical devices in the many medical devices manufacturing areas. And the first one I wanted to mention is the recently issued Artificial Intelligence Act, which has been published in last April, and it contains several requirements for putting into the market of AI systems. And in its actual formulation, the text also includes medical devices in a scope of legislation. I'm currently researching on it and how could it apply and what could be the regulatory challenges indeed for this, but also if it will follow the legislative procedure, and it will kind of remain, although I don't think it will remain the same exactly, but it might be bring impacts to medical devices, especially medical device software, because medical device software may be considered as a high-risk AI system. And then, if so, requirements foreseen in this regulation should be also applied to medical devices. And a big question is how exactly, because there are several provisions that are a bit at the moment critical to me to analyze, and will reserve, of course, more elaboration, but it's really important to underline that. And the second one is the NIS2 proposal, the Network and Information System Directive. So then it's called the NIS2 proposal because there was another proposal that another directive that entered into force in 2016. It's the Network Information Security Systems Directive. And it was, as the European Union puts it, it was the first EU cybersecurity level piece of legislation. It included several security requirements for several actors and included the healthcare sector and healthcare providers in its scope. However, and I would like to point out here, in its revised version, the NIS2, it's also proposing to include medical devices manufacturers and also other kinds of medical device manufacturers for the so-called critical medical devices. That it's another kind of medical devices considered to be critical under certain circumstances, which is a proposal that is currently being discussed also in light of recent developments due to COVID-19. So it's really important to point out here that also this proposal may enlarge its scope and may bring new requirements for medical device manufacturers, and most importantly, notification requirements of cybersecurity incidents. This is more or less a bit the overview that I wanted to provide, and of course, I would like to thank you and the organization of the SeCoIIA project, and Ivo and Caterina. Thank you so much. I hope that these kind of unusual perspectives were of your interest. 20 minutes, it's a short time to bring all of that, but I hope to have provided some details. And if anyone is interested, these are the 2 papers from which the findings I've presented today were based on. And do not hesitate to write me or to ask me any questions. And thank you again. And if you have any question, I'll be happy to address them.